Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 21st of November of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. Let's continue with Kiev at the beginning. If you remember, just in the previous video we discussed that the United States of America were going to supply Ukraine with another 100 million military aid, including different types of weapon, and most of us thought that maybe that's it and the Ukrainians probably are getting in a very bad situation, but today we got another update from Germany. Germany also promised the Ukrainians another military aid, and they're going to provide 1.3 billion of euro, and the main cost is of course air defense system IRST and the missiles for this system. Obviously the Western countries want to secure Ukraine from missile strikes, to protect the energy facilities, and to create something like a safe buffer period for Ukrainians before, let's say, before the summer or spring campaign of 2024. And about 2024, today the Secretary of National Security of Ukraine, Danilov, discussed and was interviewed, and he talked about the 2024. And as you know, in 2024, to be more precise, in March of this upcoming year, the president's elections in Russian Federation. And this man provided us some intelligence information from Ukrainian side, and he told us that the Russians are not going to make very big movements before this period of time. Obviously, the Russians are planning to establish control over Avdiivka before the president elections. So this is something like the Putin's big plan to have like superiority during the election period, to provide people who vote for him the victory over Avdiivka. But according to the Secretary of National Security of Ukraine, after the March, after Putin is going to be re-elected for another 7 years term, he will start the total war with Ukraine and total mobilization. And basically, this is the reason, one of the reasons why Austin Lloyd yesterday arrived in Ukraine. He also provided Zelensky this information, and he told Ukraine that they have like 4 months to prepare before the greatest war with Russians, with the real war with Russians, when Putin will know that he completely secured for the next 7 years. Furthermore, Zelensky, during some interview with the Sun, reported that Putin tried to kill him for 5 times, or 5 or 6 times, something like this. He even doesn't know the exact number of attempts from the Russian side. So very interesting situation. Now we are moving further to the situation on the ground, and first we're going to talk about Kherson direction. We got a lot of very interesting details and updates from this territory. First we're going to talk about the situation in Krynki. The Russian forces continue bombardments of Ukrainian positions, and according to information we have, the Russians continue the usage of such types of weapon like FAB-500. On this video, for example, we see the strike on the southwestern part. On this video, for example, just pay attention to the top left corner of the top right corner of the video, and this screen you can see the usage of RBK 500 cluster rounds that the Russians have started usage recently, and this is the type of weapon that can penetrate the defense belt. Also on this video we can see another FAB 500 strike somewhere in the central part of the Krynki. So I'm just trying to say that this city is under very heavy pressure, and the Russians are counter-attacking from some direction. And today we got new geolocation, how the Ukrainian forces were bombing with FPV drones the Russian forces on the north east part of the Krynki, and so this video geolocates and shows us the Russian progress, because as you can see, according to this map, this territory at least used to be under Russian control. So as I understand, during the clashes, as a result of clashes during the previous days, the Russians managed to improve their positions, at least in this part of Krynki. The Ukrainians from their side continue sending more and more reinforcements to this bank of the river, using the fast boats, but the Russians try to control the situation, try to control the traffic, to try to calculate and to see the point of entrance, and the point of exits, and they try to destroy everything they can. On this video, you can see how the Russians, using the new type of drone with night vision equipment, bombed the Ukrainian boats along Dnieper River. And the same situation we can see a little bit to the south, in the same area. 2 boats arrived on the Russian bank of the river, and for this attack, to destroy these posts, the Russians were using Lancet drones. And this is very weird and very strange, because maybe those were like metallic boats or very armored ones, I don't know, but the Russians were using Lancet for that attack. Maybe the Russians have so many Lancets, so they have possibility to destroy everything they can. Another important and interesting video that I would like to discuss with you about Kherson area. If you remember who watched the previous update, we talk a lot about new weapon, about some kind of new features and new things that either the Russians and the Ukrainians try to use and to implement, improve during the special military operation. For example, on this video, we see the recent footage of Russian FPV drone strikes against the Ukrainian positions. You might ask, you might say that there are nothing like important, nothing strange or nothing interesting in comparison with the previous videos, but I would like to pay your attention on the fact that the Russians start using FPV drones with night vision equipment. Imagine yourself, FPV drone is not like, I don't know, like a drone that can be reused for hundreds of times. This is one usage drone. So imagine yourself the level of Russian production, the level of involvement of technologies into development of this type of drones, that the Russians have possibilities to create one usage drone with night vision equipment. As I see, this is a very critical and bad situation for the Ukrainians, because from now on the Russians can control the Ukrainians not just during the daylight, but also during the night period of time. Sometimes we can find the situation among the Russian soldiers when they don't have, let's say, night vision equipment somewhere in Avdiivka area. But the Russians are using FPV drones with night vision. That means that the Russians have realized and understood the priorities, and that FPV drones and the tactics of usage of this type of weapon is much more effective and much more important than the usage of storm assault troopers, whose main purpose is just maybe to dig in deeper and to wait when the drones will clear the territory in front of them. So this is a very important improvement, and we understand and now realize the next Russian improvements and steps in the question of military technologies. When talking about the global scope of the Kherson area, according to the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, the Ukrainians lost during the previous 24 hours 50 soldiers, 2 armored vehicles and 2 artillery systems. I would like to point your attention in the area of the small village by the name of Yantarne. The Russians also activated their bombardments in this area. As you can see, there is a snow in this area, and the main importance of these bombardments is that this small village, this small base, is located in the vicinity of the river. So as I understand, the Russians managed to discover another, let's say, entrance point to the river, to the Dnipro River, which Ukrainians are planning to use for further, let's say, landing operations somewhere along Dnipro and other rivers in this area. When talking about the global scope, according to information we have, the Ukrainians are planning to start in December and January the second phase of Dnipro offensive operation. The Ukrainians have already prepared around 4,000 soldiers. They have trained them, they're still training them in the Western countries. They will be well prepared, well trained, and we are about to see the next phase. Currently it's unknown where exactly the Ukrainians are planning to land their infantry, but as I understand, the December and January are going to be very hot, and we're going to see a lot of food for, I don't know, fish in Dnipro River, if we can call it like this. Now we are moving further, and before we start talking about Zaporozhye, one more update from the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation. Today, Shoigu reported that the Russians managed to increase the production of missiles in 3 times. Just in a year, in 3 times of different types of missiles, Kalibr, Iskander missiles, Lemur missiles. We remember significant number of usage of Lemur self-navigated missiles. Mainly the Russians were using them in Novomikhailivka and in Avdiivka area, but that was a very important and very successful strikes. Furthermore, another things I want to point your attention to is that the Russians reduced the level of bombardment of Berislav, as you can see. So that means that maybe either the Russians maybe managed to, let's say, to destroy the Ukrainian forces in this area, or maybe the Ukrainians changed their plans and redeployed their forces to the south, and the next step of attack the Ukrainians are planning to implement somewhere in this direction, because today we start receiving the bombardments videos from this territory. Now we are moving to Zaporozhye area, and just one more time to discuss, because this video we will discuss a lot about situation on the ground, but we will pay a lot attention to the new technologies and new things that either the Russians and the Ukrainians use. One more time, I'll remind you that the Russians start using their Orlan drones that can capture these cell phones and to capture and to read the text messages and to hear the voice that Ukrainian soldiers speak with each other, and the Russians use these equipment to discover the Ukrainian positions. And using this tactic, the Russians managed to discover the headquarters of 128th Brigade in Zaporozhye area. We remember those video of Iskander strike and the videos of Tornado S strikes. When talking about the global scope of Zaporozhye direction, the Russians reported that as a result of clashes in this area, the Ukrainians lost 75 soldiers, 2 armored vehicles and 1 artillery system D-20. The Ukrainians haven't managed to achieve anything during the previous day. There were some attempts to make some redeployments, evacuations, but without any progress and without any results on the ground. When talking about Robotyno, the Russians continued destroying and the abandoned armored vehicle in the north of Novoprokopovka. I'll remind you that those days the Ukrainians made few attempts to enter and to capture the northern outskirts of Novoprokopovka, but they were defeated. They were forced to abandon significant number of armored vehicles, and during the previous day the Russians tried to destroy and not to allow the Ukrainians to evacuate those armored vehicles. Now we are moving to Zaporozhye, South Donetsk direction. We also got, as you can see, some updates from this territory, and the most important updates are coming from Novomikhailovka. As we discussed, as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to improve their positions. We have updated the map, and now the distance between the Russian edge positions and the Ukrainian positions in Novomikhailovka itself is around let's say 1.5 kilometers. So basically the Russians can start attacking and bombing Novomikhailovka with anti-tank missiles, obviously. But the most important updates are coming from the northern direction. There we got at least one geolocation of the usage of FA500, and from one side there is nothing special in this video, another usage of FA500, but we need to think and need to see this territory not just like another FA500 usage, but as the geography and Russian focus. For example, if we increase the number of updates since the beginning of November, we're gonna see that the Russians have moved and changed their focus. And basically, I'm not talking about village itself, but during the previous months, as you can see, according to the geolocations, the Russians were focused, let's say, on the final area, on the final fields between, let's say, Zverinets fortification and Ukrainian positions in Novomikhailovka itself. If we change the number of updates from the 1st of October, let's say, to the 31st of October, we're gonna see that the main focus of Russian activity took place on the northern part, so in this direction. So as you can see, that was the main focus of the Russian activity in October. So that means that something like an evidence that as a result of clashes during October and November, the Russians managed to probably penetrate and bypass these fields, and there are very high chances, we haven't received any geolocated confirmations of that, but according to the Russian focus of fire, I see that there are very high chances that the Russians managed to bypass all these fortifications and to get this line. And now they're starting like artillery preparation bombardments of this territory. Now we are moving further to the north in direction of Avdiivka. We had a lot of very interesting updates and details from this territory as well. The most important updates are coming from the southern direction. The Russians shown us the scene and the footage of significant number of tanks. Basically, it's not even probably the footage of tanks. If you ask me, I don't see the tanks. I see something like a traffic jam somewhere in the central street of London or New York. I'm not saying about the Russian presence and occupation. I'm talking about the number of armored vehicles that can freely move along the industrial area and this fortification area. That means that this can mean just one thing, that the Russians have already bypassed this territory. They continue sending more and more armored vehicles. Basically, the Russians managed to achieve penetration in this territory. They managed to break the Ukrainian defense, not even break, but to collapse, and now they continue sending endless waves of armored vehicles one by one in direction of the central part of Marinka. So basically, maybe right now, maybe these days, the Russians were trying to concentrate their forces on this line and for further offensive operation deep inside of Avdiivka, the village or the city of Avdiivka. So we see, and this is like the real facts on the ground. Another very interesting and important video, not about the situation on the ground, but also partly from the situation on the ground, but from the other side, is another way and another approach of the usage of the weapon. Let's talk about this area on the south of Tsarskaya Khota fortification. If we increase the number of updates, particularly about from this territory, you're gonna see a very interesting picture. We're gonna see significant Russian focus just on this territory. During the previous months, just November, the Russians were bombing this territory heavily with tanks, with anti-tank missiles. The Russians were attacking this territory, bombing with FABs. The Russians used everything they have just against this territory. The question is what the Russians were trying to destroy. What was the biggest problem in this area? And basically the Russians were trying to destroy this machine gun position. And that was a very big pain in Russians because these machine gun positions basically ruined the Russian plans and the Russian timings in their attacks in the direction of Tsarskaya Khota. And the author of the next video that we're going to watch told us that it was a very big pain, big problem for the Russians. They didn't know what to do because they attacked this territory with such a heavy weapon that nobody could survive. Even, I don't know, nothing could survive after the strikes. But when the Russians start movement, the Ukrainians immediately start counterattacking from this machine gun position. And the Russians were very surprised and was very shocked with this situation. They didn't know what to do and they didn't realize what happened in this area. You see how many forces and how many concentration the Russians were forced to spend to suppress this machine gun position. And today we got very interesting video from the Russian side. As I understand, they managed to establish control over this territory, and we will, let's say, color this territory before the next video. And according to the Russians, the Ukrainians were using robot. Yes, I was surprised. The Ukrainians were using a robot. This is machine gun. The Ukrainians just used something like this in that machine gun position. There were no machine gunner or soldier. There was like lots of equipment. There was lots of automation. There was like a laptop or probably I don't know, some equipment, some device to control this machine gun position in a distance. This area has been already captured, and now the Russians providing evidence. So basically, that was a position that you could use, let's say, from Kiev, from somewhere on Bankova Street, or maybe you could use this machine gun position somewhere from the basements of the White House, and using internet, just laptop, you can press the button like backspace or Control Alt, and this machine gun would attack the attacking Russian forces. That was amazing, and this is, as you can see, another technology another technology approach how to change the situation on the ground. Of course, from one side we are saying that the Russians are winning. Maybe some people are saying that the Ukrainians are winning. I can't tell you for sure, and I won't tell you who's winning or who's losing, but I will tell you for sure that the side who will start using as much as possible of these new technology devices, like night vision equipment, like the equipment to capture the cell phones, like machine gun positions without machine gunner, like FPV drones who can carry and other FPV drones, who will start using these like technology achievements, will win this war. And this might be not even the Russians, and possibly this is not going to be the Ukrainians, because basically they don't have possibilities to produce super technology weapon. So this is the situation of Avdiivka. When talking about the global scope, today the Ukrainian sources published the videos from the basements of Avdiivka. As you can see, the situation are poor. They are living in the sub, let's say, in the basements of industrial area. This is the kitchen. They are sleeping and eating at the same place. But the only thing that comes to my eyes is that the Ukrainians are very calm. They're not like worrying about anything, like everything is okay. I don't know what these guys are thinking about. And I'll remind you that according to information we have, the Ukrainians have already redeployed the forces from National Battalion, and who currently plays the role as the anti-retreat forces. That the main purpose is not to allow the Ukrainians from Avdiivka to step back. No matter the price and no matter the cost, they shouldn't step back, according to some Ukrainians. One more time, we have already discussed the new type usage of drones, drone carrier who bring drone to another place, which can save the length of the usage of the battery. Also, another interesting technology approach. I believe that later we're gonna see more and more such updates, how like drones like Baba Yaga will be able to move maybe dozens of such types of light drones. So the special military operation improves, and we see that currently we are facing completely different armies in comparison with the 2022. Very interesting updates are coming from the city by the name of Selidova. The Russian sources published some updates, some details about the missile strikes against this small city on the west from Avdiivka. According to information we have, obviously during the previous days of clashes in Avdiivka, the Ukrainians had significant number of wounded soldiers, like thousands, not like hundreds, but thousands of already wounded soldiers. And according to information we have, most of those wounded soldiers were redeployed in direction of this Selidova city. And I'm reminded currently the Ukrainians also tried to create another defense belt in this area, and trying to, let's say, to prevent the possible Russian penetration further deep inside the territory of Ukraine. And the Ukrainians, so basically, let's return back, concentrated a lot of wounded people in like basements, in hospitals, and the Russians managed to discover those positions, and they destroyed them with Ukrainians, wounded Ukrainians inside. So the level of losses is unknown, but probably the level of loss is very heavy. When talking about Gorlovka, we haven't received anything, no change. We have received no changes during the previous day, so we are continue keeping this map as is. When talking about Bakhmut direction, if you remember, we discussed that very likely high likely that the Russians use the forces in garrison in Bakhmut to redeploy them in Gorlovka with the purpose to stabilize the situation in this area. And as you can see, basically the Russians managed to stabilize the common situation, but they were forced to slow down and to stop any activity in Bagdan on Bakhmut direction. So during this is probably the second day when we haven't received even a single geolocated confirmation. Some sources today reported that the Russians, for example, managed to maintain some gray zone in this territory, but to tell the truth, it's nothing in comparison with the progress of the first few days. So basically the Russians were forced to pause Bakhmut offensive operation until they are able to stabilize the area in the vicinity of Gorlovka. And the Ukrainians took a decision to use this small pause, and the Ukrainians started their own counter-offensives along the railways, trying to force the Russians to step back from this territory. The main problem is that the Russians, before the Ukrainians started Gorlovka offensive operation, managed to concentrate significant number of forces right in front of the railways, and the Russians were about to start the clearing operation. But then the Ukrainians launched their offensive operation in Gorlovka, and the Russians took everything on pause. And now the Ukrainians are bombing and attacking with FPV drones the Russian forces, and the Russians do have some losses. So as I understand, maybe there are very high chances that the Russians for some short period of time will be forced to step back in direction of the line between Adradovka and Mykolaievka Drugaya, just to reduce the level of losses among the personnel, and then they will restart everything one more time when they finish the situation with Gorlovka. When talking about the total loss of the Ukrainians on Donetsk direction, the Ukrainians lost 245 soldiers, 4 armored vehicles and 1 artillery system. When talking about Kupiansk and Liman front line, we haven't received lots of updates, just the numbers from the Ministry of Defense. About Liman, the Ukrainians lost 200 soldiers. The level of losses is very heavy, one of the heaviest level of losses, but as you can see on this front line, we haven't received nothing. We haven't received even a single geolocated confirmation, so it's currently this territory is covered with the fog of war without any understanding. Now when talking about Kupiansk front line, we got the video of Russian FPV drone strike against the Ukrainian positions along the railways on the border, on the Ukrainian edge positions on the north in the vicinity of Kislovka-Kotlarovka. So basically we can confirm, and this is the first evidence, that the Russians started the storming process of this territory. We know that currently the storming process can be split into few parts. The first one, artillery preparation. No, the first one is FPV drone preparation. The second one, artillery preparation. And after that, the reconnaissance of combat, then reconnaissance in force, and after that, the assault process. So basically, the Russians have already launched the first stage of storming of Kislovka-Kotlarovka by storming and bombing bombing the Ukrainian positions with FPV drones. So we'll see what is going to be next. When talking about the total losses, the Ukrainians lost 25 soldiers on this direction. Also, very interesting updates are coming from Belgorod. The Russians started testing the Iranian 122 millimeter howitzers shells, and this is very interesting because we know that currently there are some problems on the Middle East, but Iran is the same as North Korea, continues supporting the Russians with their own rounds of their own production. So very interesting detail. So as you can see, Ukrainians, North Korea are not the only one country who support Russia with rounds. Iran as well do this as well. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.